Before we begin today's episode, I'd just like to give a special shout out to a few special listeners: Adrian, Grecia, Wayne, and the Cat Doctor. It really means a lot that you took the time to write in. Although, Adrian, I'm not sure how worried I should be about opening those pictures you sent. Anyhow, thanks again. And for those that haven't yet, we'd be delighted if you would give us a follow on your podcast app and perhaps even give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us out a lot. Now, on to today's episode. On a March night in 2013, in a quiet neighborhood of San Pedro Sula, Honduras, police officers discovered a green Hyundai Santa Fe SUV smoldering by the side of a residential street. Inside the vehicle's trunk lay a gruesome scene: 2 bodies wrapped tightly in blood-soaked bed covers, showing signs of an attempted burning. Just moments earlier, a frantic call had come in from a nearby house. A young mother named Laura Knight Rodriguez was on the line, claiming that a gang of armed, masked intruders had broken into her home, tied her up, and kidnapped her husband and a friend at gunpoint. Now, as dawn approached on March 23, 2013, that desperate story seemed to collide with an unsettling reality. The kidnapped men, Said Alfredo Castrillo and his colleague Fernando Sanabria, were the very ones now found dead in the back of the smouldering SUV. What at first sounded like a harrowing home invasion was about to unravel into something far more twisted and calculated. Police rushed to the house from which the distress call had come, a modest home in the Residencial San Jose de El Pedregal area of the city. There they found 34-year-old Laura Knight, barefoot and distraught, locked in the master bathroom with her infant daughter and the family's live-in housekeeper, 22-year-old Mayra Ramos. Laura appeared shaken but unharmed. She told officers an unbelievable tale. Around 4 a.m., 4 unknown men had burst in through the back door, some wearing ski masks, and even one oddly dressed in shorts, she said. They had tied her and the maid up, shut them in the bathroom, and then abducted her husband Said and their house guest Fernando at gunpoint. She described how the intruders had ransacked the home and vanished into the night with the 2 men. It was a chilling account, the kind of violent crime all too familiar in a city that was, at the time, plagued by one of the highest murder rates in the world. Just 100 meters from Laura's house, investigators examined the recovered SUV and immediately noticed details that didn't line up with a simple abduction. For one, the 2 bodies in the trunk were cocooned in thick quilted bed covers that unmistakably came from inside the Knight Castrillo home. If unknown kidnappers had truly snatched the victims, why would they take the time to fetch blankets from the victim's own house to wrap up the bodies? And why dump the bodies only a block away instead of speeding off? Inside the SUV's cargo area, detectives also found a cigarette lighter discarded near the corpses, along with charred upholstery on the back seat, evidence of a clumsy attempt to set the vehicle and its grim cargo on fire. Yet aside from some scorched seats, the fire had not caught, leaving behind crucial forensic evidence. To the officers on the scene, it looked less like a professional kidnapping and more like a staged cover-up. These clues made their way back to lead investigator Sub-Inspector Juan Carlos Mendoza, who began to suspect that something wasn't quite right with the home invasion account. An exhaustive sweep of the Knight residence revealed splotches and smears of blood in 2 separate bedrooms, as well as in the hallway connecting them. It was as if 2 violent struggles had taken place under that roof. In the master bedroom, where one would expect Laura or Said to have been sleeping, investigators found bloodstains soaking into the mattress and carpet. In a second guest bedroom down the hall, more blood was discovered, later identified as belonging to Fernando Sanabria, the family friend from Colombia. The pattern suggested that both victims had been attacked inside the house, not dragged out alive by intruders as Laura had described. Investigators even recovered a large kitchen knife hidden beneath the bloodied sheets that the killers had used to wrap the bodies. The knife appeared to be from the Knight's own kitchen, and forensic tests would later reveal traces of the victim's blood on its blade. If kidnappers had broken in, why would they murder the men on site, using the household's knife and linens, only to dump them nearby? As the sun climbed higher on that somber morning, police quietly separated Laura from the others to take her statement in detail. Laura Knight, by all appearances, was a grieving wife in shock. Petite and blonde, with red-rimmed eyes, she repeated her story to the detectives. 4 men, masked, armed, speaking in Spanish with no particular accent. She claimed not to recognize any of them. They allegedly stormed in around 3 a.m., just after everyone had gone to bed, and they beat her husband before tying her hands with a scarf and shoving her and the maid into the ensuite bathroom. From behind the locked door, she tearfully recounted, she heard her baby daughter start crying in the next room and begged the intruders not to hurt the child. The gunman supposedly assured her the baby would be fine, then dragged Saeed and Fernando out of the house. Laura said she waited in terror for what felt like an eternity until she no longer heard the intruders' voices. Finally, after managing to free herself, a detail she struggled to explain, she called the police emergency line 119 for help. It was a harrowing tale, but detectives noticed that Laura's wrists bore no ligature marks or bruises, unusual if she'd truly been tied up tightly. And Mayra, the young domestic employee, was quietly telling a slightly different story of that night, one that would soon cast Laura's version in a very troubling light. Once considered a mere witness, 22-year-old Mayra Lisseth Ramos had worked for the couple as a housekeeper and nanny, caring for their 1-year-old baby. In her initial interview, Mayra confirmed some of Laura's story. There had been a gathering at the house earlier in the evening of March 22, 2013. Saeed and Laura had invited a few friends over to watch a televised football match, a World Cup qualifying game. They ordered food, shared some beers, and cheered on the Honduran national team in the living room. According to Mayra, by around midnight the mini-party was winding down. One by one the guests left, until only the homeowners, their baby, and Fernando Sanabria remained. Fernando, a 32-year-old attorney visiting from Colombia, had been given the guest room to stay the night. Mayra recalled that she was cleaning up the kitchen when Laura approached her with an odd instruction. "Don't lock the little side gate tonight," Laura told her, referring to a small garden gate that was usually bolted shut each night as a security precaution. The request stopped Mayra in her tracks. Leaving that gate unsecured was highly unusual in crime-conscious San Pedro Sula. "It struck me as strange because we always kept it locked," the housekeeper later testified. But Laura offered a casual explanation, something about letting the night breeze in, and Mayra, not wanting to pry, obeyed her employer's wish. In hindsight, that small act of leaving the side entrance open would take on a sinister significance. As Mayra's testimony trickled in, detectives grew more convinced that Laura's entire home invasion narrative was an elaborate fabrication. The unlocked gate hinted that someone had entered the house that night, not by force, but because they were let in. Investigators started digging into Laura Knight's personal life and relationships, wondering if perhaps the unknown intruders were known after all. It didn't take long for rumors to surface about Laura's close friendship with a younger man named Nadab Eli Mejia. Nadab was a 24-year-old who lived in the city and had been seen occasionally in Laura's company when Saeed wasn't around. Whispers among some of Laura's acquaintances hinted at an extramarital affair. When police checked phone records, their suspicions were confirmed. Laura and Nadab had been in frequent contact, including late at night in the days leading up to the murders. In fact, cell tower data showed that Nadab Mejia's phone had pinged in the vicinity of the Knights neighborhood in the pre-dawn hours of March 23. Confronted with this evidence, Laura denied everything and stuck to her story, insisting she had no idea how or why her husband and friend were killed. But in private, investigators now believed they had identified the mysterious intruders, Laura Knight herself and her secret lover, Nadab Mejia, as the likely perpetrators of the double homicide. By this point, only a day or two after the murders, Laura sensed that the investigation was turning toward her. The media hadn't yet caught wind of the case, and outwardly the police still treated her as a victim, but the questions she faced were getting sharper. Forensic technicians continued to comb through evidence. The autopsies on Said and Fernando revealed each had been stabbed multiple times in the neck and upper chest with a long-bladed knife. Said Alfredo Castrillo, just 28 years old, had bled to death from deep knife wounds to his throat, likely attacked while lying down, given the angle of some wounds. Fernando Sanabria had suffered a frenzied attack as well. One forensic report noted that Fernando's hands and arms had defensive cuts, indicating he woke up and tried to fight off his attacker before succumbing to several fatal stabs. Blood spatter analysis in Fernando's guest room showed patterns consistent with a struggle there, while in the master bedroom the blood was more concentrated in one spot on the bed. This suggested that Said might have been ambushed in his sleep, giving him little chance to resist. Indeed, a former police investigator later testified that when they found Laura, baby in arms, hiding in the bathroom, there were drag marks of blood leading from those bedrooms toward the garage, traces of the bodies having been hauled out on the bedding. Bit by bit, the forensic picture contradicted Laura's tearful tale. Honduran police and prosecutors knew they needed more than suspicions to move against Laura Knight. After all, she was a young mother with no prior record, and the widow of a murder victim. If they charged her without an airtight case, it would be a national scandal. So they proceeded methodically. They interviewed friends and family of the couple to build a timeline of Laura's relationship with her husband and any potential motive. Said's parents, the Castrillo Valenzuela family, were devastated by the loss of their son. He had been a rising young attorney and worked as a legal advisor for the state electrical company ENEE. He hailed from a respected family in Santa Rosa de Copan, and by all accounts was a devoted husband and doting new father to the baby girl he and Laura had together. To Said's grieving parents, the idea that their daughter-in-law could be involved was almost unthinkable. They had welcomed Laura into their family when she married Said in April 2011, in a beautiful church wedding. Photos from that day show a beaming Laura in a white gown, Said proudly at her side. Now, just 2 years later, Said was dead, and they wanted justice, wherever it might lead. By September 2014, as the investigation quietly progressed, the Castrillo family publicly demanded answers. "We won't rest until we know who did this to our son," Said's father told a local reporter, his voice choked with sorrow. In the meantime, detectives uncovered a compelling motive: money. They learned that Said Alfredo had a substantial life insurance policy through his job, naming Laura as the beneficiary. If Said died, Laura stood to receive a payout that would set her and her child up for years. Additionally, with her husband gone, Laura would have full control of their shared assets, including a house and bank accounts. Investigators also considered the possibility that eliminating Said was the lovers' twisted way to be together openly, a sort of, if we can't divorce, we'll do something drastic scenario. Divorce can be stigmatized in conservative Honduran society, especially given Laura's background as the daughter of evangelical pastors. Indeed, Laura's own parents were prominent church leaders at the local Ebenezer evangelical congregation in Santa Rosa de Copan. The revelation that a pastor's daughter might commit adultery and murder was a deliciously scandalous element that the press would later seize upon. Whatever the precise blend of passion and greed motivating them, it appeared to law enforcement that Laura Knight and Nadab Mejia had carefully plotted Said's demise, and Fernando's unfortunate presence that night made him a collateral victim. By midsummer 2013, Honduran prosecutors were preparing to formally accuse Laura Knight of masterminding the double murder. A summons was issued for Laura to appear at an initial court hearing in San Pedro Sula on July 29, 2013. Detectives had kept her under discreet surveillance up to that point, hoping she might lead them to evidence or a contact with Nadab. But Laura was one step ahead. Sometime in late June or early July, before that court date, Laura Knight simply vanished from Honduras. When police went to arrest her, she was nowhere to be found. She had quietly fled the country, taking along her infant daughter, and slipped away into the wind. It was a brazen move that caught authorities off guard and instantly transformed Laura from suspect to international fugitive. With Laura gone, an Honduran judge issued a warrant for her arrest and notified Interpol. A red notice was circulated, marking Laura Knight Rodriguez as a wanted person for parricide and homicide. The local media got their first sensational taste of the case when news broke that a Honduran wife suspected of killing her husband had absconded abroad. Headlines in La Prensa and El Heraldo blared about the asesina prófuga, fugitive murderess, and her alleged lover accomplice. For Saeed's grieving family, it was a second blow. They now faced the possibility that Laura might evade justice entirely by living under the radar in another country. Unbeknownst to Honduran authorities at first, Laura had fled to Argentina, over 4,000 miles away. This wasn't a random choice. Laura's mother was actually Argentine by birth, which gave Laura a plausible claim to Argentine citizenship. Arriving in Buenos Aires sometime in mid-2013, Laura and her little girl blended into the large Honduran expat and immigrant community there. Not long after, Nadab Eli Mejia also turned up in Argentina, reuniting with Laura. The lovers reportedly spent more than a year living together in Buenos Aires, moving from one rented room to another while keeping a low profile. They adopted new identities. Laura is said to have used false papers, possibly a fake Argentine ID, to avoid detection. During this time, Laura filed a petition to officially obtain Argentine nationality, likely hoping that if she became a citizen, she could avoid extradition back to Honduras. The legal process dragged on for many months, buying Laura time. Meanwhile, Honduran prosecutors did not sit idle. They were coordinating with Interpol and the Argentine authorities, tracking any leads on the couple's whereabouts. By early 2014, those efforts paid off. In April 2014, Argentine police acting on an Interpol red notice located and arrested Nadab Mejia in Buenos Aires. He was picked up on the street and found to be carrying a Honduran passport under his own name. A careless mistake for a fugitive. Under intense questioning by Argentine and visiting Honduran detectives, Nadab initially denied everything. But facing the possibility of murder charges, he eventually cracked. According to later courtroom statements, Nadab admitted he had been present at the night house the night of the killings, but he tried to pin the actual murders on Laura. In his version, it was Laura who stabbed her husband in a sudden burst of rage, and he only helped dispose of the bodies out of panic. Honduran authorities weren't inclined to believe his self-serving story entirely, but his admissions did corroborate much of the physical evidence. With Nadab in custody, Argentina agreed to extradite him promptly. On September 4, 2014, Nadab Eli Mejia Coca was put on a plane back to Honduras. He would soon face trial for double homicide on Honduran soil. Laura Knight proved more elusive. After her lover's arrest, she went to ground. For a time, she vanished from Buenos Aires as well, and Argentine police couldn't locate her. It turned out Laura had gotten wind of Nadab's capture, possibly through news reports or contacts, and immediately fled Buenos Aires, heading west to the city of Córdoba. In Córdoba, Argentina's second-largest city, Laura assumed a new low-profile life. She dyed her hair darker and often wore a headband or scarf. To support herself and her toddler, she took a job as a cook at a small bar in the city centre, paid under the table. Laura managed to remain under the radar for nearly another year, but her luck ran out in mid-2015. In June 2015, after Argentine courts finally denied her nationality request and approved her extradition, Laura cut off the ankle monitor she'd been assigned from an earlier period of house arrest bail and slipped away from her assigned residence in La Plata. The Argentine authorities, embarrassed that a murder suspect had escaped on their watch, issued a new manhunt. "We have alerted all forces worldwide to recapture the fugitive," an Argentine police official announced on June 26, 2015. For a few tense months, Laura's trail went cold. Honduran tabloids breathlessly speculated on her whereabouts. Was she being hidden by distant relatives in Argentina? Had she crossed into Paraguay or Brazil? As it turns out, she never left Argentina. She was hiding in plain sight in Córdoba province, laying low. Finally, on May 27, 2016, nearly 3 years after the murders, the fugitive hunt came to an end. Acting on a tip, Argentine federal police officers spotted a woman who matched Laura Knight's description walking near the busy Plaza Colón in downtown Córdoba. In a swift operation, they detained her. The woman at first gave a false name, but under fingerprinting and further questioning, she confessed her identity. It was indeed Laura Knight Rodriguez. She was 24 years old at the time of this arrest, considerably younger than many imagined. She'd been just 21 on the night of the crime, though her poised demeanor had led some Honduran reports to list her age as 34. Laura had lost weight on the run, but was otherwise healthy. Her toddler daughter, Saeed's child, was found safe with her, and Argentine Child Services temporarily took the little girl into care. When police searched Laura's small rented room, they found a collection of hair dyes, some cash, and documents related to her failed citizenship plea. It was clear she'd been preparing to change identities again if necessary. The game was over. Within hours, Laura was flown under guard to Buenos Aires to face extradition proceedings in the same La Plata court that had earlier granted her house arrest. Honduran authorities breathed a sigh of relief. The alleged mastermind of the home invasion murders was finally in custody and heading home to face justice. Laura Knight's extradition back to Honduras was major news. On October 21, 2016, she arrived at Ramon Villeda Morales Airport in San Pedro Sula on a flight from Argentina, escorted by Interpol agents. TV cameras captured the moment she was led, handcuffed and stone-faced, down the airport steps into a waiting police vehicle. Public curiosity about the case had grown over the years, and now the media frenzy erupted anew. Here was an attractive young Honduran woman accused of one of the most cold-blooded crimes imaginable, plotting her own husband's murder, and who had eluded capture across multiple countries. True crime programs began dubbing her the Viuda Negra Catracha, Honduran Black Widow, and dissecting her life story for clues. At her first appearance in the San Pedro Sula courts just a day after landing, a crowd of onlookers gathered, including Saeed Castrillo's family and friends. Laura, now 25, showed a hint of a baby bump beneath her loose prison uniform. Incredibly, she was pregnant. Her lawyers immediately petitioned the court for house arrest on humanitarian grounds, arguing that because Laura was expecting a baby, she should not be kept in a harsh jail environment pre-trial. The prosecution countered that Laura had faked or exaggerated pregnancy claims before to escape consequences. Indeed, back in 2014, she had cited needing to care for her young daughter as a reason for bail, then absconded. A medical exam confirmed her pregnancy was real this time. Reportedly, she had become pregnant while on the run in Argentina, possibly by a new partner during the months she hid without Nadab. The judge sympathized but remembered her history. This was an accused double murderer who had already fled once. The request for house arrest was denied. Laura Knight would await trial behind bars, though in a medical ward of a women's prison, where she later gave birth to a second child while in custody. It took nearly 2 more years for Laura's case to finally come to trial, due to various procedural delays and her lawyer's maneuvers. In the meantime, her lover-turned-co-defendant, Nadab Mejia, had already been tried and convicted. Nadab's trial took place in 2016, and even without Laura present, the Honduran prosecutors laid out the full, horrific story. A panel of judges found Nadab Ili Mejia guilty of 2 counts of murder, one for Saeed, one for Fernando, including an aggravated count of murder during a robbery for the killing of Saeed Alfredo. Apparently, the court concluded that after killing Saeed, Nadab had taken valuable items, likely cash or a wallet, from the home, making it a murder-robbery scenario. Nadab was sentenced to 50 years in prison, 25 years for each victim. He maintained throughout that Laura was the mastermind, but he did not testify against her directly. Whether out of residual loyalty or fear, we may never know. By the time Laura's own trial began in late 2018, Nadab was serving time in Honduras's notorious Tamara Penitentiary. In a grim epilogue, Nadab Mejia would not live out his full sentence. In March 2021, at age 28, he was found dead in the prison laundry area under mysterious circumstances. Officials said there were no immediate signs of foul play or suicide, and his cause of death remained undetermined pending autopsy. Some whispered it was karmic justice, others suspected a violent inmate quarrel. Regardless, By then, Nadab's fate was largely a footnote in the story. For the Honduran public, the main event was the trial of Laura Knight, the allegedly scheming wife. When proceedings opened in November 2018, the courtroom in San Pedro Sula was packed. Laura, now about 27 years old, appeared subdued, often bowing her head. Her defense team's strategy was to sow doubt and suggest alternative theories. They pointed out that Fernando Sanabria, the slain Colombian friend, had been falsely rumored to work for ENEE, the power company. The defense even produced a letter from company stating Fernando wasn't an employee, implying perhaps he had other business or enemies. They hinted at the possibility of a botched kidnapping by criminals targeting Fernando or even Saeed for unrelated reasons, suggesting that investigators were too quick to pin everything on Laura and Nadab. The defense also made a rather bizarre claim that Laura had been pregnant at the time of the murders in 2013, introducing an old forensic pregnancy test result, perhaps to imply she was physically vulnerable or to garner sympathy. Prosecutors flatly dismissed that as a falsification and irrelevant to the facts. In truth, the evidence against Laura was formidable. Across several days of testimony, the prosecution presented a damning case that held the jury and the nation spellbound. They called forensic experts who explained how the blood evidence and crime scene reconstruction proved the murders happened inside the house, contradicting Laura's home invasion story point by point. They showed photographs of the comforters in which the bodies were found, matching them to the bedding in the Knight household. One particularly chilling exhibit was a crime scene photo of the Knight's bathroom door. On its interior side were scratch marks and dents, as if someone locked inside had tried frantically to pry it open, marks that Mayra Ramos admitted she made in her panic when she realized something terrible was happening outside. But most riveting of all were the witnesses. Several of the friends who had been at the house watching the soccer game earlier that evening testified, confirming that everything had been normal and jovial until they left around midnight. They recalled that Laura seemed perfectly calm that night, no sign of distress or warning of danger. The implication was that the only thing different about that night was Laura's secret plan. Then came the testimony of Mayra Ramos, the housekeeper, which many credit as the decisive piece that illuminated the whole plot. Speaking in a mix of Spanish and through a translator for legal formality, Mayra recounted the events of that night from her perspective. She confirmed that after the friends left, everyone went to bed. Saeed to his bedroom, Fernando to the guest room, the baby to her crib, and Mayra herself lay down in the baby's room to be near the child. Then she told the court about Laura instructing her to leave the side gate unlocked, a highly unusual request that stuck in her mind. In a clear voice, Mayra described being jolted awake in the middle of the night by a sharp noise, a thud or perhaps a muffled scream. Moments later, Laura had come to the room where Mayra and the baby were. Laura was visibly agitated, claiming that men were in the house. She grabbed the baby from the crib and hustled Mayra into the master bedroom's ensuite bathroom, insisting they hide there. Laura locked the bathroom door from the inside and told Mayra to stay quiet, that intruders were outside. Mayra obeyed, clutching the wailing infant, utterly confused and terrified. Through the bathroom door, Mayra hadn't heard voices or footsteps to corroborate Laura's story, only the sound of Laura herself moving about the house before joining them. This contradicted Laura's initial tale to police that she had been tied up the whole time. Evidently, she had freedom of movement at some point during the ordeal. When the prosecution asked Mayra if she believed intruders were truly in the house, the young woman paused. "No," she answered softly. She explained that Laura's behavior didn't add up. Laura wasn't screaming for help or pleading with supposed attackers. Rather, she seemed composed and commanding when ordering Mayra into the bathroom. It dawned on Mayra only later that Laura herself might have been involved in whatever violent acts occurred that night. Her testimony placed Laura squarely as an active participant, not a passive victim, in the critical moments after the murders. It was powerful, first-hand evidence that the jury could not ignore. Laura Knight chose not to take the stand in her own defense, likely a wise move, as it spared her a withering cross-examination. Instead, her lawyers argued in summation that there was no direct eyewitness to Laura harming anyone. They insinuated that if Nadab Mejia had confessed to being present, perhaps he could have acted alone out of jealousy or some motive of his own. But the prosecutors easily rebutted this theory. Nadab and Laura had been inseparable around the time of the crime, and phone records showed a flurry of communication between them leading up to that night. Furthermore, prosecutors revealed that in the days before the murder, Laura had inquired with Saeed's employer about the details of his life insurance policy, a sign, they suggested, of premeditation for financial gain. The portrait painted was that of a coldly calculating woman who saw murder as the solution to her desires. In their closing argument, the prosecution described Laura Knight as the mastermind who had orchestrated every step. She betrayed her own family, shed the blood of her husband in their marital bed, and tried to fool the world with lies, one prosecutor thundered, pointing at Laura across the courtroom. Laura stared at the floor, showing little emotion. After weeks of dramatic testimony, the three-judge panel, Honduras uses a tribunal system for serious felonies rather than a lay jury, retreated to deliberate. On November 23, 2018, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts. By unanimous decision, the judges found that Laura Knight Rodriguez had indeed committed parricide for the murder of her spouse and homicide for the murder of Fernando Sanabria. Laura reportedly closed her eyes briefly as she absorbed the verdict, but otherwise remained stoic. Members of Saeed's family gasped in relief and embraced one another in the gallery. Outside the courthouse, Honduran reporters shouted questions at the attorneys. One asked if Laura had anything to say, but she maintained a stony silence as she was led to a waiting police vehicle for transport back to prison. It was nearly 6 years since that fateful night in 2013, and finally the central truth had been laid bare in court. In March 2019, the Honduran court reconvened for sentencing. The law in Honduras is strict on parricide, considered an especially heinous form of homicide, and each count of murder can carry decades in prison. The prosecution urged the maximum, highlighting the calculated nature of Laura's crimes and her attempt to pervert justice by fleeing. They asked for a 70-year term in total. Ultimately, the tribunal sentenced Laura Knight to 60 years in prison. This comprised 35 years for the parricide of her husband Saeed, and 25 years for the murder of Fernando. In Honduras, sentences do not run consecutively beyond a certain cap, so effectively 60 years was as heavy a punishment as the court could impose. Practically a life sentence for a woman who would be in her 80s by the time she'd be eligible for release. As the sentence was read, Laura finally showed a flicker of emotion. She bit her lip hard and her eyes welled up, perhaps realizing the weight of what 60 years meant. Her face, once that of a cheerful young newlywed, was now etched with the cold realization of spending the rest of her life behind bars. Outside the courthouse, Saeed's father told reporters, "We have justice, but nothing will bring back my son. We will raise his daughter and tell her the truth of what happened to her father." A poignant reminder that an innocent child had lost both her parents in this tragedy, one to murder, the other to prison. Today, Laura Knight sits in the women's prison Francisco Morazan in Tamara, the facility where Honduras houses female inmates convicted of serious crimes. She is serving out her 60-year sentence, with little hope of early release. Honduras has no parole system for such offences. Her second child, born while she was incarcerated, was handed over to relatives, reportedly Laura's parents. The evangelical pastors took custody of the baby, while Saeed's parents continued to raise the older daughter. In a tragic coda, the two little girls are growing up in 2 different countries, each learning about their mother's deeds in carefully measured doses.